She only asked him to pretend for one day, but neither of them expected it would change their lives forever. What began as a desperate plea from a mother about to lose her daughter soon spiraled into a high-stakes custody battle, a tense courtroom, showdown, and a love story powerful enough to defy prejudice. Watch closely, because by the end, you'll see how one small lie turned into the greatest truth of their lives. Stay with us till the end. This is a journey you don't want to miss. Charlotte Reynolds was a woman caught between love and despair. In Atlanta, she lived in a modest apartment, working long nights as a freelance designer, stretching every dollar just to keep life steady for her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Her world revolved around that little girl, but the shadow of her past threatened to take Emma away. Bradley Kensington III, her ex-husband, was a man of wealth, connections, and arrogance. He had lawyers who spoke for him, judges who favored him, and a legal clause sharp enough to cut her heart in. 2. The agreement said Emma deserved a stable family environment, and Bradley twisted those words to mean one thing. Charlotte, being single, was unfit to keep her child, Dot. She left another draining meeting with her lawyer, her hands trembling around a stack of court documents. The city blurred as she walked. She tried to imagine life without Emma's laughter in her home, without morning hugs before school, without bedtime stories. It was unbearable. That was when she accidentally collided with a man carrying rolled blueprints and 2 cups of coffee. Papers scattered. Coffee splashed. Both of them crouched down to clean the mess. The man apologized softly, his voice calm, his eyes kind. His name was Daniel Brooks Dot. In another life, Charlotte might have just smiled, said thank you, and moved on. But something inside her broke open. Before she could stop herself, the words left her lips, shaky and strange. "Sir, can you pretend to be my husband for one day?" Daniel froze, confused, unsure if he had heard correctly. Charlotte's face burned with embarrassment. She rushed to explain, stumbling over her own desperation. They sat in a small cafe nearby, and she told him everything: the divorce, the money, the influence Bradley wielded, and the clause, this single clause that could rob her of her daughter. Her voice cracked as she confessed she had run out of options. Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't judge. He listened, quiet and steady, letting her pour out her fear. He asked a few careful questions, not to pry, but to understand. Then he leaned back, sighing. He explained that years ago, he too had raised a daughter alone after losing his wife. He knew the ache of protecting a child at all costs. Slowly, he nodded. Against his cautious nature, he agreed to help her Dot. From that moment, their strange alliance began. They spent hours shaping a believable story. How they supposedly met, the values they shared, little rituals that made their life as a couple seem authentic. Charlotte filled in gaps with humor and warmth, while Daniel added details from his real past, his work in community development, the way he spent Sundays cooking, the memories of raising his own daughter. It was half truth, half invention, but the blend felt oddly natural. The true test came when Emma met him. Charlotte arranged the meeting at Piedmont Park. Emma was shy at first, clinging to her mother's hand, her eyes watchful. Daniel didn't force himself into her world. Instead, he brought a kite. He asked about her drawings, her favorite colors, her favorite games. Little by little, Emma's guard melted. Soon, she was running across the grass, her laughter chasing after the kite Daniel held. She showed him her chalk sketches on the pavement, explaining every line and shape with the seriousness of a true artist. Charlotte stood back, stunned. Emma had never warmed so quickly to anyone. With Bradley, visits often ended in tears, but with Daniel, she was free, laughing, smiling, talking without fear. Then came the moment that nearly broke Charlotte's heart. Emma looked up at Daniel, tilting her head, and asked, "Are you going to marry my mama?" Daniel glanced at Charlotte, then answered gently, "Your mama is very special. I care about both of you." It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't part of the plan. But it carried a sincerity that left Charlotte speechless. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Emma played on the swings while Charlotte stood beside Daniel. She whispered her thanks, her voice trembling. He shrugged, saying, "Emma was an incredible kid." But Charlotte felt something deeper. For the first time in weeks, hope stirred in her chest. What had started as a desperate request to a stranger was becoming something she never imagined. A chance, fragile and real, to fight for her daughter, and maybe, unknowingly, for her own heart as well. Charlotte held her breath as she walked up the courthouse steps, Daniel by her side. Her palms were damp, her heart pounding in her chest. She had faced Bradley Kensington before, but never like this, never with everything on the line. Inside, Bradley waited with his new wife, Priscilla, a woman who draped herself in designer labels and smirked as if the outcome was already sealed. Their whispers floated across the hallway, sharp and cutting, laced with the kind of classist venom that stung even when unspoken. Priscilla let her eyes sweep over Charlotte's thrift store dress and Daniel's modest suit, before leaning into Bradley with a laugh too loud to be accidental. It wasn't just arrogance. It was dismissal, as though Charlotte and Daniel were trespassers in a world too polished for them. The courtroom itself was heavy with tension, lined with dark wood and the weight of decisions that changed lives. Judge Margaret Hawthorne sat at the bench, a woman of calm authority, her eyes sharper than her words. She began the session, her voice firm, asking for opening statements. Bradley's lawyer painted Charlotte as unstable, unprepared, and unfit. They leaned on Bradley's wealth, his new marriage, and his perfect household, presenting him as the only suitable guardian for Emma. Charlotte sat rigid, every insult digging into her skin, but she held her tongue. Then came Daniel's turn. He rose, straightening his shoulders, and when he spoke, the entire courtroom shifted. There was no rehearsed performance, no polished speech, just honesty. He told the judge about meeting Charlotte, about the strength she carried in her daily life, about the devotion she had for her daughter. He described Emma's bright spirit, her art, her laughter, and how she thrived under Charlotte's care. He admitted his role, their shared bond, and how family wasn't about appearances, but about love, stability, and presence. His sincerity cut through the room, silencing the smirks of Bradley's side. Judge Hawthorne leaned forward, taking notes, her expression unreadable but attentive. During recess, the tension spilled into the hallway. Bradley approached, his arrogance unmasked now that the judge wasn't listening. He sneered at Charlotte, accusing her of parading a stranger as a husband. His words dripped with contempt, questioning her morals, even her motherhood. Priscilla stood nearby, arms crossed, smiling with cruelty. But before Charlotte could defend herself, Daniel stepped forward. His voice carried a weight Bradley hadn't expected. He called out Bradley's manipulation, his neglect, his selfishness. He spoke with the authority of a man who had raised a child, who knew what love demanded. His words were sharp, but his composure was steady. For a brief moment, Bradley's confidence faltered. He wasn't facing the timid Charlotte anymore. He was facing a man who saw through him. Charlotte's eyes widened as she listened. Daniel wasn't pretending in that moment. He wasn't acting for the judge or for appearances. He was defending her, defending Emma, because he truly believed in them. That realization sent a warmth through her chest that nearly brought her to tears. The real test came when the judge requested a private meeting with Emma. Charlotte's heart nearly stopped as her little girl disappeared into Judge Hawthorne's chambers, clutching her small backpack. Time stretched unbearably. Every second felt like an hour. When Emma finally returned, her face was calm, her eyes clear. Later, Charlotte would learn what her daughter had said to the judge. Simple, childlike words that carried undeniable truth. "Mama's happy now. Daniel makes her smile. Those words were like sunlight breaking through clouds. Judge Hawthorne made no immediate ruling, but her demeanor shifted. She asked sharper questions of Bradley's lawyer. She pressed for examples of his involvement in Emma's daily life, details that Bradley struggled to provide. The confidence on his side began to crack. Charlotte sat straighter, her hand brushing against Daniel's under the table, a silent exchange of gratitude and hope. He didn't look at her, but his hand lingered, steady, as if to remind her she wasn't alone. For the first time in months, the scales felt balanced, not because of money or power, but because of truth. Daniel's testimony and Emma's honesty had planted something in Judge Hawthorne's mind that Bradley couldn't buy. Authentic love, as the gavel struck to end the day's session, Charlotte exhaled, a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time she believed they had a chance. She looked at Daniel, and he gave her a small nod, the kind that said without words, "We're in this together." And she knew he meant it. The courtroom was silent as Judge Hawthorne read her decision. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. Every word felt like a drumbeat until the final line rang out. Custody would remain with Charlotte Reynolds. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Bradley's face twisted with disbelief. Priscilla gasped loudly, but Charlotte could only sit there, stunned, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. She had won. Emma was hers to raise, to love, to protect. Relief crashed over her in waves, and before she even realized what she was doing, she turned to Daniel. He was smiling softly, his eyes warm, and she threw her arms around him. It was supposed to be pretend, but that embrace felt like home. In the weeks that followed, their lives shifted. Emma, who had once been hesitant with strangers, now tugged on Daniel's hand as if he had always been there. He joined them for dinners, bringing small gifts that weren't extravagant but thoughtful. Emma's favorite storybook, a board game they could play together, a box of cookies they'd share around the kitchen table. Soon it became routine. Daniel helping Emma with her homework, his calm patience balancing Charlotte's tired evenings. Their apartment filled with new sounds. Laughter, shared stories, even the clatter of dishes as Daniel insisted on helping. Clean up. The walls that once echoed with silence now felt alive. Charlotte tried to remind herself this was still temporary, that Daniel had only stepped in out of kindness. But with every passing day, the lines blurred. The way Emma leaned her head on his shoulder while watching cartoons, the way he looked at Charlotte when she was too tired to hide her stress, these were not performances. These were real moments, quietly weaving them into something more than they had planned. Yet, Charlotte couldn't silence the fears that crept in when she was alone. Atlanta wasn't always kind to couples like them. She had overheard whispers at her workplace, the way colleagues raised eyebrows when she mentioned Daniel's name. She caught the lingering stares when they went out as a family, and though Daniel pretended not to notice, she did. Society had its judgments, its quiet cruelties, and Charlotte worried what Emma would face, what Daniel might endure because of her one evening. As Emma slept in her room, Charlotte finally gave voice to her fear. "I don't want you to regret this," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. "People talk. They look at us differently. What if it becomes too much?" Daniel reached across the table, his hand covering hers with steady warmth. His voice was gentle but unshakable. "Charlotte, if it's real, it's worth protecting. I'm not afraid of whispers. I'm afraid of walking away from something. That matters." His words cut through her doubt, replacing fear with something she hadn't felt in years: certainty. That night, as he walked her to the door, the air between them felt charged, different. She looked up at him, their hands brushing, lingering just long enough for her heart to race. And then it happened. Their first real kiss. It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of their story for the court. It was tentative at first, but it deepened with the kind of quiet passion that spoke of truths neither had dared to say aloud. When they pulled apart, Charlotte's breath trembled, but Daniel only smiled, brushing his thumb against her cheek. "See? Real," he whispered Dot. The months that followed unfolded like a dream she never thought she'd be allowed to have. Daniel wasn't just visiting anymore. He was present in every part of their lives. Emma began drawing family pictures with 3 figures, labeling them with her childlike scrawl: Mommy, Emma, Daniel. He went from guest to constant, from helping with math problems to teaching Emma how to ride her bike in the park. Their lives, once patched together in desperation, were now stitched firmly with love. One crisp autumn evening, after a day spent raking leaves and laughing at Emma's attempts to jump into the biggest pile, Daniel asked Charlotte to step outside. The yard was quiet, the air cool, and the sky burned orange with the setting sun. He took her hands, his eyes steady, no pretense this time. "Charlotte, when we started this, it was supposed to be pretend, but I can't imagine my life without you, without Emma. I don't want to pretend anymore. I want forever." From his pocket, he pulled out a simple ring. Nothing extravagant, just a symbol of his truth. Charlotte's breath caught, tears welling as her heart soared. Emma pressed her face against the window, watching, clapping with excitement as if she already knew the answer. Charlotte nodded, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Yes." And in that moment, the lie they had once built to survive transformed into the truest promise of their lives. The news of their engagement spread quickly, and with it came a wave of emotions from every corner of their lives. Emma, of course, was the first to react, her joy uncontainable. She leapt into Daniel's arms the moment Charlotte told her, declaring loudly that she was finally going to have the family she always dreamed of. Her excitement filled the apartment like sunshine, her drawings now updated with rings and hearts, her laughter echoing through every room. But not everyone received the news so easily. Bradley's bitterness deepened, his pride stung by the thought of another man raising his daughter. He tried to mask it with arrogance, but even he couldn't ignore the glow on Emma's face every time she mentioned Daniel. For Charlotte's parents, the reaction was more complicated. They loved their daughter and granddaughter dearly, but they had grown up with their own set of prejudices and hesitations. The idea of an interracial marriage challenged the comfort of tradition. Still, when they saw how Daniel cared for Emma, when they saw the light returning to Charlotte's eyes, their cautious hearts began to shift. Daniel, for his part, knew that words alone wouldn't win over skeptics. Actions would, and he proved himself in quiet, consistent ways, by showing up when he said he would, by treating Charlotte and Emma with a tenderness that no performance could fake. His true test came during Charlotte's company dinner, an evening filled with sharp-eyed colleagues and subtle whispers. The event was formal, filled with polished smiles and hidden judgments. Daniel walked in beside Charlotte, steady and composed, his presence commanding without arrogance. At first, the whispers hummed louder, curious eyes following them across the room. But as the night unfolded, Daniel engaged with grace, answering questions with sincerity, holding his ground without defensiveness. He spoke passionately about community work, about values, about the importance of giving children a safe and nurturing home. By the end of the evening, the very people who had doubted him were nodding along, offering smiles that were no longer polite but genuine. Charlotte watched from the edge of the room, her heart swelling with pride. He wasn't just her partner, he was the anchor she hadn't realized she had been searching for all her life. 1 year later, the day they had both dreamed of arrived. Their wedding was not lavish, not marked by glittering chandeliers or grand halls. It was small and intimate, held in the garden of a close friend, surrounded only by those who had stood with them through every trial. Emma wore a dress that matched Charlotte's in miniature, her face glowing with excitement as she clutched a basket of flower petals. Daniel stood at the altar, his eyes never leaving Charlotte as she walked toward him. her gown simple yet radiant, her steps steady with the knowledge that this time there was no pretending, no desperation, only love. Judge Margaret Hawthorne, the very woman who had once listened to Charlotte's desperate plea in a courtroom, now stood before them, her voice warm as she guided them through their vows. It felt poetic, almost fated, that the same judge who had witnessed their beginning now blessed their forever. As Charlotte and Daniel exchanged rings, promising to stand by each other through all seasons of life, Emma clapped her hands joyfully, declaring loudly for all to hear, "Now we're really a family." The crowd laughed softly, tears shining in their eyes. Even Bradley, sitting quietly at the back, could not deny the truth staring him in the face. For so long, he had tried to prove Charlotte unworthy, but watching Emma run freely across the garden, her laughter full and unburdened, he saw a different reality. She was thriving, and though pride kept him from admitting it aloud, even he softened that day, realizing that what Charlotte and Daniel had built was stronger than his bitterness could ever undo. As the sun dipped low and the first notes of music filled the evening air, Charlotte looked around her, at Daniel holding Emma's hand, at her parents smiling with softened hearts, at the circle of friends who had stood beside them. A lump rose in her throat as memories washed over her. The day she had stood outside the courthouse, desperate and trembling, and the moment she had asked a stranger to pretend. How strange, how beautiful, that such a fragile request had grown into this unshakable reality. Her voice trembled as she whispered to Daniel, her words carrying all the weight of their journey. "I asked you to pretend to be my husband for one day, but you became my husband for life." He smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek, sealing her words with a kiss that held every promise they had made. And so, their story became more than survival. It became proof that love, when chosen and nurtured, could conquer prejudice, bitterness, and doubt. Their family wasn't bound by convenience or blood, but by choice, by the decision to stand together, to love fearlessly despite the whispers of the world. It was a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful truths are born from the smallest lies, and that love, in its truest form, is always worth protecting.